Iedereen welkom. Het is fantastisch dat we terug met een zeer mooie groep zijn. We gaan het terug een lap opgeven. En deze keer zitten we aan de andere kant van de wereld, zijnde Zuid-Afrika. Maar eerst dan vooral onszelf even voorstellen voor mensen die ons nog niet kennen. Mijn naam is Dimitri Bonte en mijn bedrijf heet Start2Taste, gelegen in Waregem. Mocht je ooit in de buurt zijn, wees welkom. Kom gerust eens goeiedag zeggen. Start2Taste staat voor smaken. Wij zijn met smaken bezig. En je zou zeggen, ja, als wijnhandelaar is het toch normaal dat je met smaken bezig bent. Wel, dat vind ik ook. Hè. Maar smaken laten zich niet begrenzen door landsgrenzen. En nochtans zijn er heel veel anderen die zich geografisch beperken tot een gebied. Wij niet. Wij gaan de wereld rond en wij volgen een smaak. En die smaak brengt ons in heel veel verschillende, dikwijls ongekende gebieden. En dat is fantastisch. Mijn passie is ontdekken. Dus ik vind het fantastisch om nieuwe dingen te ervaren. En mijn tweede passie is om het te delen. Vandaar avonden zoals dit. Om samen aan tafel te zitten en samen een goed glas wijn te drinken. En er eigenlijk nog iets van bij te leren.
Dat toch, hè?
2 vliegen in 1 klap. We hebben de eer en het genoegen vanavond om Sebastian van Beaumont Wines bij ons te hebben. En ja, we gaan straks, we're going to be in a couple of minutes, we're coming to you, Sebastian, so you can introduce yourself. First of all, I have always prepared a mind map, which is going to situate a little bit what is South African in this evening.
Dimitri, ik ga even onderbreken. Belangrijk voor iedereen die voor de eerste keer deelneemt. Als er vragen zijn tussendoor, je kunt die vragen kwijt op de chat. Als je onderaan je scherm kijkt, ga je daar een knopje zien, chat. Daar kun je even een vraag intypen. Dus we gaan iedereen op mute laten. Dat gaat het meest gemakkelijke zijn, dat er niet te veel achtergrondlawaai is. Ik ga nu en dan naar de vragen kijken en ik ga die vragen dus doorgeven ter gepaste tijd. Dat is gemakkelijkst. Bepaalde vragen kan ik combineren. So Sebastian, I'm just telling everyone that if they have a question, they can put it in the chat. I will manage the chat, so you don't have to look at the chat, at the questions. From time to time, I will interrupt you if I can, and I will ask some questions that are put there by the audience. Okay.
Fantastic. I would just like to say that there's no such thing as a question that can't be asked. You can ask me any question.
Exactly.
So feel free to fire away.
Exactly. Perfect.
En wat er alvast ook al praktisch kan gebeuren, als het goed gaat, hebben jullie 6 glazen voor jullie staan. Jullie kunnen alvast de 6 wijnen uitschenken. Ik stel voor dat je misschien van elk het half flesje dat je gekregen hebt, een half flesje uitschenkt. Dan kun je eventueel morgen of later op de avond nog bijschenken. Maar op deze manier krijgen ze alvast zuurstof en dat komt zeker aan vast de wijn ten goede. All right. Let's start to taste. First of all, like I said, I prepared a mind map.
Wow.
Yeah, you can be impressed now. This is it. Okay. Sebastian, anyway, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you the stage completely, but if I'm telling things which are wrong, or you would love to add something, please feel free to shoot some stuff so I can complete or making my mind map more detailed.
Perfect.
All right. I'm going to do in English and Dutch at the same time. I don't know which language I'm going to speak, but this is, if we talk about South Africa, it's the Republic of South Africa. And if we talk about some data, we have some 59 million of inhabitants.
Yep.
De kilometers, of de vierkante kilometers zie je ook staan. And we have some, let's say, 2,778 farmers which are making wine, of which are growing grapes, excuse me, which makes 92,000 of hectares of vineyards, and 5 hectares to be very detailed. It employs a lot of people, which are directly or indirectly making business with the wine industry. And the production is in totally 9.5 million of hectoliters, which is exactly the 9th place in volume in the wine when you see the whole world. These are numbers of 2018. Mm-hmm. But when we compare 17 and 18, it's decreasing. Am I right? Is it still decreasing, or is it?
Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely still decreasing. I think the shift is in where there are regions that are difficult to make a kind of viable business.
Yeah.
So there's other crops that have come in that are competing with the wine business, like citrus and fruit, apples and pears, and those kind of produce that are more profitable.
Yeah. Is it also like in every country which making wine that young people, the young generation doesn't want to do it anymore because it's too labor intensive and less money?
Yeah, I think that's always the case. Yeah. Not so much as in Europe. I think Europe is suffering that in a much bigger way. Here, people still, a lot of people still want to work in the farms, but there's, they now work with a cell phone in their pocket and earphones in their ears, and it changes the kind of way people work. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, continue to the facts. Actually, they have 11 official languages, which is the 4th highest number in the world. So almost the top 3. So keep going like this. And for example, Zulu is the most spoken language. Then we go to Xhosa. I don't know how to pronounce it, actually.
Yeah.
Xhosa. And then you have Afrikaans, which is like a Dutch kind of speaking, and English, of course, yeah. And the African language is one of the youngest languages in the world. It's only a little bit more than 100 years old. So, yeah, good to know. Like the Table Mountain, which we're going to see maybe further. I have a photo of that, but I'm going to show it in a minute. It is one of the world wonders, and it is a mountain which is really flat at the outside. It's one of the, I think, tourist things that everybody wants to see. It's a very, how can I say, spectacular view, spectacular mountain. Which was surprising that South Africa has 3 capitals, which for us is really strange. So we have 3 hoofdsteden. You have the legally one, which is, I don't know how to say it in English, the bestuurlijke hoofdstad, and the juridic one. How does that come? Can you explain a little bit more like this, or is it?
I think it was just because the country was so controlled and different. This has all come from in a way, I would say the apartheid years where the nationalist government wanted to control the whole country. And so they had important people who needed to be appeased in in these 3 major cities. And then you can also include Durban and Johannesburg, of course, which is where the place of gold. So it is. I don't know the full reasons, but yeah, it is like that. It's they want to consolidate it, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Okay. But also, it is the birth of the humanity. They have found some footprints, which were from the Homo sapiens, which are 117,000 years old. Wow. So. Yeah. Cradle of humanity, maybe. And
I was actually listening to something recently about that. There was a guy, a young researcher who's been questioning the Zimbabwe ruins and these kind of very unusual structures that are built all over southern Africa. And they thought there were only like 10 of them. Then suddenly they realized there were 100 of them. Then they realized there were 1,000 of them. Then they realized there are 100,000. These structures are all over the whole of southern Africa, and they're hundreds of thousands of years old, and it's really it's still out there as to what why they built them, and there's no kind of they weren't used as housing. They were used. This guy's theory is that they were kind of acoustic, really complex acoustic structures. So they worked off sound. He's got a whole theory on it. It's really fascinating.
Okay.
For another discussion.
Yeah.
Where we're not discussing wine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be another evening, maybe with a good glass of wine. But what I also found in South Africa, that there is an app which you can calculate how much your girl or wife is worth. You really need to write this down, lobelo.co.ze, and this is like, you need to ask, there are some questions, I think 20 or 22 questions, something like that. I did it today. And then at the end, what is my wife worth? Or what is my girlfriend who's going to be my wife worth? Or in cows, or in the valuta, or in the money. So, did you know that?
We have a president who has, lobolo is a way of paying for your wife. So I didn't pay for my wife. She wanted to be here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very traditional way. And I mean, our former president, Jacob Zuma, had, I think, 8 wives, or has 8 wives. So he paid a lot of money. He paid a lot of lobolo to afford that. He was a wealthy guy, so he stole most of the money, but, it's okay.
Okay, but if we go back to the history a little bit of South Africa, then I had some highlights. So there was much more to tell about the history, but these are my opinion, the highlights. So like in 1652, it's actually that then the Oost India Company, I'm going to do it in Dutch. You know the history, I guess, Sebastian. Dus hebben ze eigenlijk een bevordering, zoals het hier staat, een bevoorradingsstation op Kaap de Goede Hoop. En eigenlijk om de scheurbuik te vermijden, want water, als je slecht water of onhygiënisch water dronk, dan werd hij daar ziek van natuurlijk. Dus eigenlijk was het beter van alcohol te drinken, zoals wijn. En dan liet hij eigenlijk wingers, dus wijnplanten, aanvoeren vanuit Europa, om eigenlijk in Zuid-Afrika te planten, die dan eigenlijk 3 jaar later ongeveer aangeplant geweest is, om dan zo'n 4-tal jaar later, dus 2 februari 1659, werd er voor de eerste keer wijn van Kaapse druiven gedronken. Nee? En op die manier is eigenlijk alles zo'n beetje begonnen, sinds het begin aanplanten, en dan is de wijngeschiedenis eigenlijk gestart in Zuid-Afrika. We aan het denken, de eerste helft van de 19e eeuw was er zo'n beetje een meningsverschil tussen Groot-Brittannië en Frankrijk, met als gevolg dat er eigenlijk een grote markt was voor Zuid-Afrikaanse wijnen. En in een zeer korte tijd zijn ze eigenlijk bijvoorbeeld van 1,5 miljoen liters naar 4,5 miljoen liters gegaan. Omwille van de grote markt zijn de UK. Maar op een bepaald moment, in 1861 ongeveer, disaster, want Groot-Brittannië had het meningsverschil of het probleem met Frankrijk opgelost, met als gevolg dat de export van Zuid-Afrika zo'n beetje in elkaar stortte. Dan kort daarna, 1886, had je de druifluis, die eigenlijk gans de wereld wel een beetje plat legde. Alle druivenstokken ter wereld met de Europese onderstok, dat beestje at die wortels op. En eigenlijk worden alle druivenstokken kapot. Dan moeten ze heraanplanten met de Amerikaanse onderstok. Die was wel resistent tegen die druifluis. Dan iets later hadden ze dan de Boerenoorlog. Dan in 1918 werd het KWV opgericht. Dat is het Coöperatieve Wijnbouwersvereniging, die eigenlijk stabiliteit in de wijnindustrie bracht. En die organisatie in heel de boel bracht. 1973 is de oprichting van een wijnwetgeving. Daarvoor was er dus geen wetgeving. Het doel was eigenlijk om betere kwaliteit te geven, maar ook om structuur en eenheid te streken in die wijnwetgeving. En uiteraard, op die moment hielden ze ook rekening met de Europese wetgeving. Daarop hebben ze een beetje afgestemd. Want heel veel wijnen werden naar Europa, of nog altijd, worden naar Europa geëxporteerd. En dat is dan eigenlijk zo'n zegel, die dan eigenlijk met die wine of origin te maken heeft. Er zat er een nummer in en via die nummer kunnen ze eigenlijk iedere fles traceren. Dat is gekoppeld aan bepaalde wetgeving, maar ook aan een proefondervindelijke of een proeftechnische goedkeuring. Dus iedere cuvée wordt eigenlijk geproefd en goedgekeurd of afgekeurd. Een groot moment ook voor Zuid-Afrika was eigenlijk de afschaffing van apartheid sinds 1991 pas. En 1994 was Mandela president. Dat zijn zo'n beetje mijlpalen eigenlijk in de geschiedenis van Zuid-Afrika. But then, I find it actually very complex and not complex. If we talk about geographically speaking wine regions, the more we go to the left in this case, the more we go narrower, the more we go to smaller regions. To give you just an idea, when we go completely to the left, a single vineyard, dat is enkel één specifieke wijngaard, of course. Then you go a little bit larger, which is going to be an estate, dus van één bedrijf, één wijnbedrijf. And then you go to a ward, a district, a region, overarching region, and then a geographical unit. Am I correct, Sebastian?
Correct, 100%.
Yeah. And actually, Western Cape is approximately 80% of all the wines of the production, and wine production actually.
Yeah.
Can you add something on this explanation, or is it like?
Yeah, I think that it is quite. So I think what I find that us as kind of wine producers and wine enthusiasts, I like to call it freaks, wine freaks, they're kind of really into it, like really want to understand the different regions and the sub-regions and the detail behind it. But I think for most consumers, what's important is whether it's wine of origin South Africa, and then maybe Western Cape, and then maybe like one of the regions. Like I think Stellenbosch is obviously well known generally out there, so, or Constantia, and I think it's helping South Africa to define its different terroirs, its different sites, and because the mountains and the kind of geographic structure of the Cape, it has this kind of thing where within a very short space or distance, regions can change climatically quite dramatically. They can be really quite different. Within 20 kilometers, you can have two very different regions, and a good example is probably Bot River and Elgin, or where you've got Elgin's 450 meters above sea level, and we at sea level. So we have direct influence of the ocean. They have kind of this influence of the a little bit of the ocean, but not that much, but more the altitude, and so you have these kind of dramatic changes.
Yeah. Okay. But I wrote it down like a region. You can compare it like Bordeaux, the whole region of Bordeaux. Then a district is like Médoc. Narrower, and then you go more narrow, for example, au Médoc.
Exactly.
And you go to one estate.
One property. The estates are not like, it's not just because we are not an estate. You actually have to register as an estate, and there's some rules and restrictions around what you're allowed to do with your grapes. You're only allowed to use grapes from your own property, which I do anyway. But that's the kind of rule around calling yourself an estate. It's quite an old way of doing it.
Okay.
And the new thing is, a big trend is towards single vineyards, registering single vineyards, recognizing these old vineyards that exist, and that's a big topic at the moment. Yeah.
All right.
Sebastian, if we talk about Beaumont, we talk about the Cape Coast, the region Cape South Coast, the district is Elgin.
No,
Walker Bay. And the ward is Bot River.
Yeah.
Bot River.
Okay.
Waterfield, or occasionally known as the Bot Riviera.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And then, so if we talk about then more specific, more closer to the wine, the grapes, you have approximately there are 70 allowed to have the wine of origin certificate. I wrote down here the most common. So it's lightly more white than red, but I believe it is changing. It's more going toward reds. I wrote some red.
No, I don't think so. It might be a little bit, but not really. I don't see it happening.
Yeah. Okay. So and then chenin is maybe, I don't know, like Geen, you call it, one of the most famous ones.
If you sorry, Dimitri, just to say that you know, at the end of apartheid, it was traditionally South Africa was 70% white grapes and 30% red. So there has been a big shift to planting reds. So there has been a big expansion in terms of reds, but I wouldn't say that we're going to be going past that 55% much more. You know, I think it's probably stabilized now.
And they do it because they feel the climate is going more towards red, it's more going warmer, or is it because there was a more demand of reds?
There was more demand of reds.
Okay.
Especially new cultivars, well, like Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah, yeah.
Because
even
of the international ID, maybe that.
Yeah.
Or commercial international interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So chenin, most common, actually, famous for his chenin. Definitely Beaumont for sure. Chardonnay, Sauvignon, Riesling. Very interesting Riesling you can find also in South Africa, I find. Then if we talk about the red ones, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Merlot, Cinsault, and maybe the proud of, or what is South Africa very well known for, is pinotage, because you can only find it here in South Africa, which is actually a crossing between Pinot Noir and Cinsault.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Climate. You have a temperate Mediterranean climate, which means soft. And anyway, it doesn't freeze. It doesn't have really below zero temperature in the winter, and we have a really cool breeze from the Atlantic and Indic Ocean, which is very good for the vineyards. And then the law, we already discussed that. Wine and spirit board we have, which is the seal that we just saw.
I just think that the one thing there, don't underplay the importance of the ocean, because if we had had a warm ocean, we would not be farming. It would be desert completely where the Western Cape is. Just because the Atlantic Ocean is so cold, it actually allows us to have this Mediterranean climate. Without it, it would be, yeah, desert.
Okay.
Ja.
Nice.
Gewoon een kleine toelichting is dat die wind waarover dat Dimitri sprak, die zuidoostenwind, eigenlijk ook de Cape Doctor wordt genoemd.
Ja.
Een beetje.
Okay, so that was my mind map, which is always interesting to give a general overview. But of course, it is the most important theme tonight is going to be Beaumont wines. We all have 6 wines. The idea is, Sebastian, that we maybe start tasting the first one quite fast, and that we talk, taste, you know. So this is the role. But anyway, you were already on the stage a little bit, but maybe you can start to introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about Beaumont wine. So very welcome. I'm very proud to have you with us. So, and actually you just finished his last day of harvest, I believe, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's a special day. So yeah, thanks, Dimitri. I appreciate that, man, and it's great to connect. I know it's kind of slightly surreal doing it on these kind of platforms. I'd much rather have you here in South Africa and feeling the wind blow that's blowing outside, because the southeaster is blowing right now. It's kind of autumn, but it's been beautiful weather, and we've been very lucky with the last few months of very healthy conditions. My heart does go out to a lot of the European winemakers and wine regions where the conditions are really pretty terrible with the spring frosts, and that I really feel for a lot of them who I've got some good friends who are struggling with that at the moment. So yeah, in my small part of the world, we in this tiny appellation called Pot River or Proef. We are a small family business. We've been here since 1974, so we've been here long enough to understand the region, the challenges, the beauty, the complexity, and all the other things that go with farming and winemaking and trying to run a family business. So it's a very special and intense world that I live in. But that's also the kind of magic about it. So I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to kind of get involved with this business through my parents. They didn't force me to join it. I kind of volunteered after making a bit of wine actually in 1993 with a retired engineer at the time. He was living up the road from us, and he was such an enthusiastic, passionate wine person. He loved drinking wine and he loved great wine. And I got to make a barrel of pinotage with him in 1993. I just finished school, so it was my first introduction to real winemaking. And we hadn't even really started producing any commercial wines here as part of our property. So that was the start and the hook of me getting into this crazy business. But before that, my parents bought it as a old wine farm. It had been making wines probably since we think at least since the 1940s. And the reason for that, why we know that, is that we have this old winery that is full of concrete tanks and kind of all the old equipment. Not so much old equipment anymore, but it's got the residue of the concrete tanks that were here, and they were probably built by Italians, prisoners of war in the 1940s or 30s, and yeah, there were two Lithuanian families that owned the property at the time. There is record of this property making wine in 1820s, probably not commercially or seriously. It was probably just to supply wine to the local travelers coming through, because the origins of the farm is that it was a Dutch East India Company farm, so it belonged to the Dutch. Its name is Compagnie Strift, so it belonged to the Compagnie, and so they set it up as an outpost farm. So when you're coming from Cape Town and you're going up the East Coast, this farm was a great place to get replenishment of supplies, and so it was set up to do that. We have things like an old watermill that's 250 years old on the farm that we still run once a month. So we've got some of this kind of the history of a property that was there to do many different things for people coming through. So that's part of it.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sebastian, but I have a movie you sent me from just a small introduction to show the property and.
Yeah, cool.
So maybe it was a good idea to show that.
Yeah. So that's my tasting room. That's where I'm kind of looking out now, but it's dark at the moment, so
hey everybody,
you can't see it.
Welcome to Family Wines. We're here in Pot River on a beautiful late summer kind of afternoon, and I'm going to quickly take you through the cellar on a quick tour of what we do and how we do it. So here we go. Come with me. Firstly, obviously, it's harvest time, so we've kind of got through most of it. We're still waiting for some reds. The white wines are all being pressed and are fermenting, and we're going to have a quick look at one of those. Out of our concrete tanks, the winery built in the 1940s means that we've had to adapt it to suit modern winemaking practices. So we've got these fantastic concrete, closed concrete tanks and open fermenting vats to ferment our wines in. This is our tasting room area. It's a great place to come and experience our wines and enjoy them. There's a whole range to taste, and yeah, you can relax, have a delicious meal in our deli, and savor our wines while you do it. We even do a couple of older vintages every now and then, so there's always something interesting to try. My great something grandfather, I think. And here I've got some delicious Chenin blanc. Smells really good. That's still fermenting, still very cloudy. 2021 for our unwooded Chenin. And yeah, I'm really excited about 21 vintage. The harvest has been very cool in terms of the conditions. So the ripening has been slow. The flavors are very intense, but I've kept the kind of natural acidity levels really high. It's fresh, it's healthy, and it's tasting delicious. If I could transport it to you, I would. All these tanks are basically storing fermenting Chenin blanc juice. They've all got cooling in them, so we've adapted them to help make really fresh, delicious style of unwooded Chenin. And here in the production side of it, where we're making the wines, and yeah, it's a little bit of a steep time. Wasn't built for modern winemaking, but we press outside here with a nice bag press that we purchased a couple of years ago. Super easy. So the grapes coming out here, the vineyard, everything's harvested by hand. And then we, if it's white wines, obviously goes to tank to settle, and will be racked and then taken to another tank to ferment, either naturally or with some cultured yeast. If it's especially for the unwooded Chenin, I want to keep the fruit flavors very fresh and intense. For Hope Marguerite, it's all completely natural ferment, and same with New Baby. Then the red wines, we don't have a gym in Montreal, so we have to do our annual workout in the open fermenters, and we ferment all our red wines in these tanks. And this is where you get a good workout, punching them down every few hours to extract those delicious flavors and all the tannin and the color out of the skins. And here we got some Malbec, some Cabernet, and some pinotage fermenting. And yeah, when I'm not doing that, occasionally I get to hit the beach. So I stuck the old surfboards up on the wall that are being relegated to the museum, and got some others at the house to go and surf in, and that keeps my mind and soul healthy, so I can make great wines or delicious wines. I don't know. That's always up to you. Yeah, and it's a very simple winery to work in. It's my philosophy is very much letting the grapes speak and not trying to manipulate them. I don't add as little as I can or as I have to of anything that needs to be added to wine, whether it be yeast or acid or that kind of thing. That's basically it. A bit of sulfur to preserve them. Otherwise, the wines are natural and even vegan. You don't count the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into making them. So all those out there who want to know, my wines are very, very naturally made, with minimal intervention, and really allowing them to express the Votre terroir, the South African character and personality, and yeah, that's the purity of it. So I hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
So the blood, sweat, and tears, we need to taste that in the wine, of course. Let's start with the first one.
Sebastian, just one question I see in the chat. Someone is asking if you do the fermentation in the open tanks, if you don't have the problem of wild yeasts that are mixing and causing problems.
It depends on how you see it. Like wild yeast is either an opportunity to slow your fermentation down and draw out more flavor, or it's it's a threat to your winemaking if you've got unhealthy grapes. So for me, I'm a viticulturalist. I think you call it a vigneron, you know, in the traditional French word, where you grow the grapes, you make the wine, and you got to sell it as well. So that's my job description. So I spend a lot of time in my vineyards, and we're not a big operation, and I think because of that, it's a lot easier to manage things like wild ferments or natural ferments, or so yeah, it's a really good topic. It's something I'll talk about with one of the wines a little bit more. But no, I don't see any risk with it. I think, yeah, bad winemaking, there's a risk, sure. So if you don't pay attention, if you spend too much time surfing, then there's a risk.
Okay, let's start with the first wine, which is a Chenin Blanc.
Yeah,
2020.
yeah, the Chenin.
Yeah, I mean, we need to say also that South Africa is 6 months before us. So now you're doing the harvest, it's summer at your place. So that's maybe also a click that we need to make. It's below the equator.
Equator, yeah, no, it's always a little bit surreal when I come to Europe in kind of traditionally in kind of early parts of your summer, and I'm bringing a 2021 wine over for you to taste, and people go, "What? You've already made it?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, we've already finished harvest about 3 months ago." So yeah, it's a little bit strange, but we've, as I said in the little video clip, we've had a really beautiful harvest in 2021. We had a very similar harvest in 2020 with very good conditions, very healthy conditions, slightly warmer vintage, but it doesn't show in the wines. I think the wines still keep their stylistic freshness and focus, and the first wine is very much about that. You know, it's not a wine that, I don't know. My father lived in Spain for a long time. He was a bit of a kind of a hippie kind of guy. He got into wine in Spain, and he just realized that wine was kind of an essential thing to have in life, you know. And I think we make this wine as a wine that you can just crack open and you can drink it, whether you just want a glass of wine or whether you want to have it with a meal. It's a very diverse, very easy wine to use in many different situations. So I quite like saying that you can open it at about 6 in the morning and you can keep drinking it until about 12 at night. So it's a wine that just suits that. It's Chenin. It's the beautiful part about it is the lovely acidity, the kind of freshness, this lovely tropical kind of fruit spectrum, with a little bit of a savory spice and a kind of a slightly serious edge to it. But that's what I like about wine. You know, it must still keep you interested and not just tutti frutti, you know, kind of wine. You know, it's still a serious wine in a way.
Yeah, it is. And if we compare Chenin, because if we talk about as a European about Chenin, then of course everybody thinking about the Loire.
Yeah.
We also make magnificent Chenin.
Yeah.
Chenin, we call it actually, but okay. So what is your opinion, the difference between the South African, and why is Chenin actually so popular in South Africa? Why did you choose that?
Well, I think it came out, you know, it came to South Africa very early on. I think Van Riebeck brought some of the early vines, and you know, it's adapted itself to the climate. I always say you really can't compare Loire style Chenin to South African style Chenins. And I've spent time in the Loire. I've traveled up and down the river, and I realized it's two different worlds. You know, you cannot compare there's nothing similar in terms of soils, in terms of climate, in terms of philosophy and approach, in terms of all the kind of things that influence a wine's character and personality. They're just two different worlds. So to say South African Chenin is better than French Loire style Chenin is ridiculous. It's just or vice versa. They're just completely different. So we don't have a lot of that chalky limestone soils here in South Africa. There are a few patches where there's that kind of profile, but fundamentally the climate is just very different. So yeah, this one I think this wine is very, I think for me, I aim for a lot of elegance in my wines, and I like to drink wine. I don't like to taste wine. So for me, wine, whether it be serious or not, the best wine is the wine that you suddenly realize you've finished the glass and you finish the bottle and you won't love to have just another taste, you know. And then that's the wine that really speaks to me, you know. That's what I love about it.
Sebastian,
so, yeah.
Sebastian, we have a question from someone from the Loire who is producing chenin wines over there. And she asks if she has the impression that there is some residual sugar in this one. Yeah. Is there some in it or not? Yeah.
Yeah, so I quite like a little bit of residual sugar as long as it's balanced with the acidity. And it's not a deliberate strategy, but I do use natural ferments and cultured ferments for this wine. And very often I find with the natural ferments, I'm left with a little bit of residual sugar. And what I like about it is that in South African chenins, a lot of the time you get a kind of what I call a pithiness, but the word relates to that kind of inside of the apple. When you've eaten your apple and you're left with a core where the seeds are, and you eat that part, you get this kind of phenolic bite that can be quite like intense. And a little bit of sweetness just helps to smooth that over and give the wine more length and kind of a more delicious palate weight and complexity. So yeah, I like it a little bit.
Yeah, okay, I will just do a little translation. I mostly do it in 2 words, otherwise it's taking too long. Dus wat hij zegt, dus de vraag kwam van iemand die onder ons is, die chenin wijnen maakt in de Loire. Dus Dimitri had ook de vraag gesteld van wat is het verschil tussen de chenin wijnen uit de Loire en vanuit Zuid-Afrika. Het heeft sowieso al met een terroir die voor een stuk verschillend is gezet, met het klimaat natuurlijk, die voor een groot stuk verschillend is. En er werd ook de vraag gesteld of dat er wat restsuikers aanwezig zijn. Dus restsuikers, hoe komt dat? Wel gaat u natuurlijke suikers, die worden omgezet naar alcohol. Als je op een bepaald moment stopt, bij wijze van spreken, met je fermentatie of dus het omzetten van je suikers naar je alcohol, dan krijg je een beetje restsuiker. Je vergelijkt dat als in een appel bijten en als je in de kern van de appel komt, dan heb je zo wat, ja, die pitjes en dergelijke die wat, ik ga niet zeggen storend kunnen zijn, maar die toch een bepaalde gewaarwording geven in je mond. Door het feit dat er wat restsuikers aanwezig zijn, vind ik dat ja, ik ga niet zeggen meer passeert, maar dat eigenlijk een perfect gevoel geeft. En dat eigenlijk een perfecte toevoeging is aan de wijn. Oké, thank you, Sebastian.
Aanvullend is het is omtrent balans. Dat was eigenlijk hetgeen dat hij wilde zeggen. Dus ja. Yeah, in my opinion, this is really, like you said, it's a very easy drinking kind of style, but it is one that it's not just glue, it's more than a glue. It's a glue which has something intellectual, which has something interesting. So it's,
cool.
Very nice. And the beautiful thing is that now we can compare this with the Hope Marguerite.
Yeah.
Which is the same grape, but in another way, of course.
But in a completely opposite stylistic approach in terms of winemaking. So, but fundamentally, this one of the defining differences with Hope Marguerite is that the grapes for this wine are coming from our 2 oldest vineyards, which in European terms is not really that old, but they were planted in 1974 and 1978. Which for South African conditions is old, and that's because we don't have these very cold winters that prevent some of the kind of wood rot diseases that affect vineyards, which you do have in Europe, which allows the vines to live longer in Europe and not quite so long in South Africa. But yeah, these are two special vineyards that were planted by my father, and I've grown up with them my whole life. So they are very, very special to me in a kind of an emotional sense. But they also produce really interesting wine. I don't believe 100% that just because a vineyard is old, it should make something really magical. It's a bit like people, you know, not all old people are fascinating and not all young people are boring. So I think you know, it's that kind of dynamic. You got to have it in the right place, and it's got to be looked after well, and it's got to produce something really interesting. And so I have a very simple approach to the winemaking. It's harvest the grapes according to taste mostly, which means I do some analysis on the juice, but fundamentally I walk through the vineyard, and before harvesting it, I'll walk through a lot and just taste the grapes and try and get to a flavor spectrum that I think is right for the vintage and for the type of wine that I want to make. This wine is named after my grandmother, so her image and her legacy is very much what inspired the wine and the style of the wine. So she was an incredible person, and her name was Hope Marguerite, and she was born as she arrived in the Cape of Good Hope, which is why she got Hope as her first name. And she kind of inspired my parents to start making wine. She loved wine. She traveled to quite a few wine regions all over the world, and she was passionate about many things. And we thought, yeah, way back in 1996, when we made our first attempt at making this wine, it was literally one of the first barrel fermented styles of chenin blanc in South Africa. Nobody at that time was doing this and giving chenin a chance in barrique. And it's taken us a while to figure out how to find the right balance, or how chenin handles oak, and being matured in oak, and how much new wood is good and how much is not. And so it's taken us, 20 odd years to figure out what is the best kind of way of capturing the style of chenin blanc. For me, what is really fundamental is to not pick the grapes too ripe. And that started way back in 2005 when my grandmother and I sat and drank a really top chenin at the time from South Africa, and the wine was about 14.5 alcohol and really rich and really full and really heavy and lots of oak. And we both looked at each other and said, "Oh, it's really interesting to taste, but we can't drink this wine. This is not our style." So for me, it was always about bringing back in South Africa, we have this beautiful climate that allows you to ripen pretty much any cultivar. And what I was really looking for is maybe some of that European like edge, some of that tension, some of that lovely acidity that you get in Loire style chenins that just makes them fantastic and fascinating. And yeah, so that's what, I kind of use this as my kind of motivation for making Hope Marguerite. And over the years, it's found its place. It's found its followers and people who love the style of wine that I'm trying to make here. It varies slightly from vintage to vintage. So because I try and let each year express itself, it's very important for me. That's what I want to show. So if you taste the one vintage and it doesn't quite taste like the same as the previous one or the next one, well, that's the idea. I mean, wine is not Coca-Cola, so we're not trying to make a formula, we're trying to let a season express itself. So that's important.
Yeah. This is also one of the chenins, the most elected or chosen one from all the press, which is always being on the top of the chenin rated list of South Africa. Dus dat is een van de grootste, of een van de meest gelauwerde chenins uit Zuid-Afrika eigenlijk, die Hope Marguerite. Later is er iemand die daar heel veel sterren aan heeft. Dus Hope Marguerite is de chenin van Zuid-Afrika, kunnen we dan eigenlijk zeggen.
Sebastian, main differences. So you talked about some differences. So you talk about, it's very nice to have both of the chenins next to each other. So for the second one, the Hope Marguerite is the oldest vineyards we're talking about. It's fermentation and education, let's say, in oak.
Yeah.
And we're talking about natural yeasts, and the first one is a combination of, let's say, commercial yeasts and natural yeasts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The Hope Marguerite is 100% natural yeast or spontaneous fermentation. Obviously, a winery has a lot of yeast in it already, so to say that it's completely natural, which would mean that it would all have to come off the grapes, is a bit of a fallacy. I think it's not true. But what I have done in the last 2 years is I've actually done a thing where I've been experimenting with small portions of Hope Marguerite, where I take some of the grapes, I get one of the pickers, one of the ladies who help me pick, to pick some beautiful bunches just before we're about to harvest. And we put them in a jar, we bury the jar under the vines, and we let a real natural fermentation start. And that juice I then take and I inoculate the barrels before they start fermenting with that fermenting juice, to really see whether I can get a pure natural fermentation to dominate the fermentation process. So it's pretty interesting, and I've got some good results out of it, but it's early days, and I still will look at it each year and see how it works.
Oké, dus, dus het verschil tussen de eerste en de tweede, dus als je de tweede drinkt in de Hope Marguerite, dus dat is 100% voor zover dat kan, maar 100% natuurlijke gisten. De eerste is een combinatie van, laten we zeggen, commerciële gist en natuurlijke gist. Voor de tweede, de Hope Marguerite, spreken we van de oudste wijngaarden. De fermentatie gebeurt op eikenvaten en ook de opvoeding van de wijn gebeurt in eikenvaten. En we spreken over eigenlijk een spontane fermentatie. Wat hij vermeldde is eigenlijk wel leuk, het verhaal dat hij een beetje aan het experimenteren is om de fermentatie zo natuurlijk mogelijk te kunnen doen verlopen door iemand van de pluksters, voordat de pluk gebeurt, enkele van de mooiste trossen te laten plukken, die in een kruik te steken en te begraven in de wijngaard. En daar eigenlijk een spontane gisting te laten doorgaan. En dat gebruikt hij dan om dan eigenlijk als giststarter zijn wijn te laten gisten. Dus, maar dat is nog in een vroeg stadium. Dus wel een leuk verhaal, vind ik. Ja. Oké, thank you, Sebastian.
Yeah, before, I'm going to show a little bit where your property is placed on the earth. So this is going to be in a couple of seconds. But belangrijk is om te weten, op de lijst die er voor jullie ligt, the new baby, by the way, it's going to be the third one. Maar dat is geen 100% chenin. Mijn excuses daarvoor. De Excel was iets te rap, of ik was iets te rap, ik weet niet wat er mislopen is. Maar de new baby is een blend. Ik ga het u zeggen, en straks gaan we het nog een keer herhalen, is 45% chenin. Dus mocht je hem straks vergelijken terwijl dat hij babbelt, het is geen 100% chenin. Dus vandaar dat ik het nu al zeg. Dus 45% chenin, 26% Sauvignon Blanc, 15% Semillon, 8% Colombard en 6% Chardonnay. Dus actually, all the white grapes that he has is going to be in the new baby, but that is going to be for in a couple of seconds. But first of all, my friend Google Earth. Yes, beautiful Africa, where actually is already on the earth is written Beaumont family wines. It's amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah, everybody knows where it is. So if you do open Google Earth, it's going to be spontaneously on your screen. We're going to see where Sebastian is now. You see, if you want to say something, you can explain, huh? But I don't know.
I'll wait for you to get a bit closer. But that's a good place there. That's obviously the whole of South Africa, and then you're going in there. You can see Stellenbosch, Cape Town, and the kind of proximity. So if you're coming out of Cape Town, you're heading kind of southeast in our direction, and 1 hour's travel from the center of the city to where we are. But there's one where the arrow is, and that dark green patch is the big set of mountains that separate our appellation from Cape Town. That's even better. You can go one more, and then we can like talk a bit about it. Yeah, so that's that gives you a very good idea of where we're at. So the town is named after the river that runs through it, and where the river ends up is in the lagoon of the Bot River Lagoon, the Botrefi Lagoon down there. And then obviously the kind of Walker Bay region is starting in Bot River, and literally where Beaumont wines, where the S ends is the end of the appellation. So it's defined by its proximity to the ocean. So it has to be within the hills that kind of limit the movement of the ocean's kind of cooling effect is what defines the appellation. So that's the Bot River Valley. If you're looking further south, you've got this name Carvadas Kraal, which is where the Hemel en Aarde Valley is. So that's the Hemel en Aarde, where Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are more popular. Properties like Hamilton Russell and Bouchard Finniston, Newton Johnson, those kind of guys are all there. Basically, you have to have a double barrel surname if you want to make wine there. So you can't, you know.
How far is this from your property to the sea?
About 12 kilometers.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if you go further south, then you got Hermanus, the town of Hermanus. And yeah, here we are. You can, whatever, yeah. Hermanus is down the bottom down there. There we go. So just to give you an idea, because everybody comes and watches whales along there or something like that. But, yeah, it's a beautiful town to visit.
Okay.
So yeah, I think if you go back into Bot River and into where we are, then I can talk a bit more about how the farm is structured and where our vineyards are.
This is the river actually here.
The river runs that way, yeah. From the north, yeah, down.
Yeah. It is like the Loire actually, no?
Yeah, very similar. Just no caves. So yeah, right now I'm sitting in that kind of collection of buildings there, where your arrow is right now, or a little bit back, but the winery is in there. And then we have vineyards basically in front of us to the east, and then to the south of where the image is now are most of the vineyards on the hill. So you got to go out of the screen a bit further down. Yeah, it's hard to describe.
Okay.
So it was also obviously winter when this was taken, so you can't really see the vineyards as kind of definition, but
actually they are quite big mountains, or do I have a wrong idea about this?
Well, where we are, there's lots of hills and not really mountains, but to the north of where we are, that's mountain. That's really, that's about 800 meters of mountain at the highest peak. It's beautiful up there, and you can hike up there, and then you've got yeah, it's all natural fynbos nature reserve, and the biggest part of our property is 250 hectares of that mountain. So we can't farm it, but it's for nature. It's very special.
Let's try to see if I can do like this.
There you go.
This is the entry.
That's the entry. The wall is freshly painted. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can see also the mountains a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the Baviaanskrans. So it means the baboons, the baboons hill or crest.
Yeah, the Baviaan.
Yeah.
And actually, I would also want to show this because we talked about size.
Yeah.
So this is South Africa, and if we take this and we go to Belgium, just to show you a little bit, if we put South Africa like this, you see how it ends.
Yeah.
And this is actually almost precisely 40 times Belgium. Just 39.999, something like that is, let's say, 40 times square meter more than Belgium.
How many people live in Belgium?
11 million.
Ah, okay. So at least you don't have a population that's the same as ours.
Yeah. Yeah. So, small entertainment.
Cool. Very good. Yeah, I think it's always good to give you kind of context of where we come from, and I think, I mean, it's always, I think, like any wine region in the world, you have to visit it to really understand the complexity of it and what influences it and how the kind of personality of the wines are formed by the region. So it's and this wine that you were talking about, Dimitri, the new baby, is a kind of a no rules wine. Nobody told me how to make the blend or what I should base it on. It was basically using all the white grapes that I grow, and my mother always said that with the beginning of each harvest, because she used to make the wines, that the beginning of harvest was like the beginning, like just before you're about to give birth to a child. You kind of really don't, you kind of know that the basics should be all right, but you don't know what you're going to get. And she said she always had this, like, it was always like the birth of a new baby. And so when I was making this wine in 2015 for the first time, I wrote on the barrels "new baby," and those of you who've had children, once you give them the name, it's very difficult to take it away. So that's where the name stuck as new baby.
Yeah, and it's also written on the label, there's a new baby, and
Yeah.
5 barrels. You will 5 barrels of 400 liters, I know it, yeah?
Yeah, at least you asked that. Most people don't ask, you know. Could be like 2 million liters or something like that.
Yeah, imagine.
No, it's a small production. It's something that I'm kind of like, one of the beauties of being in a small family business is that you can be as creative and as free to do what you want. You know, it's just makes it very special, you know. So I made this wine because I really thought that each of these single cultivars I've worked with for so long, but kind of on their own, they make interesting wine. And I bottled all of them as single varietals at some stage, or single cultivars. But I decided to put them all together because I wanted to see what this kind of blend could produce. And in 2015, when I put it together, it was like I immediately fell in love with the wine. I was like, this is perfect, this is great, this is delicious. And since then, it's kind of just stayed like that. And I kind of have an idea of what I want to create with it, but and it's always going to be chenin driven. But the other varietals kind of come in and they add their complexity and flavor spectrum and they kind of make the wine unique, you know.
Sebastian, we have a question on. Someone is asking if it's oaked or not.
Yeah, it's oaked. It's oaked, but only in older barrels. So there's not a lot of new wood. But yeah, it's 11 months in barrique. And then I bottle it, and then I mature it for about 2 years in bottle before I release it.
Ja, dus de fermentatie op de opvoeding eigenlijk gebeurt in eikenvaten. En dan daarna, maar dus gebruikte eikenvaten, dus je hebt een stuk de eiktoets, maar niet te veel. En daarna nog 2 jaar op de fles, om flesrijping te hebben Vandaar dat we hier spreken ook over in 2016. And how do you decide on the exact percentages on the single varieties?
You're asking me my secrets. I can't tell you that.
Okay. You can also send them by mail. I will distribute.
Okay, I'll remember that answer. It's okay. Yeah, I think it's it's always difficult to start a blend and to start with this kind of unusual mix. But I know all the vineyards and I know the grapes and I know their personalities and I know how they express themselves. And for one, I know that I want chenin to be the kind of the core of the wine because it adds the structure to the wine. The Sauvignon is an old vineyard, so all these vineyards that go into this are 20 years and older. So they're not young vines. And the Sauvignon Blanc has this kind of magical expression of blackcurrant sometimes, which I find really special. And the Semillon is there to give that kind of lovely waxy texture. Also gives good aromatics. The Chardonnay is there to give mouthfeel and a bit of kind of weight to the wine. And then the Colombar brings the acidity. So it's not a very flavorsome grape, but it's got amazing acidity. And in South Africa, we very often need good natural acidity to lift the wine and to keep it very fresh.
Yeah, three different wines, if you ask me. So first one is an aperitif, easy drinking, but talking to you really in an intelligent way. And then the second one, very nice chenin, nicely and balanced oak, because very important in white wine to have a white wine with the balanced oak. And then the third one is really, wow, this is really one I will have your attention when you have it in your mouth. You really want some attention, and it's a really, really long aftertaste, nice length, impressive wine, if you ask me. Yeah, also very nice, balanced. And a question, so the 15 was the first vintage you made, so this is second vintage?
Yeah.
Did you change something between 15 and 16, except the name, because the first one was Vitruvian New Baby?
AKA New Baby. So, yeah, I have a brother-in-law who's a very good writer and journalist, and we spent a long time talking about the name for the wine. And I have Vitruvian, which is the red blend that I make, and then I thought I would call this Vitruvia, like the feminine version of Vitruvian, but it just caused too much chaos in our, all the way from the ladies who pack my wine and get everything ready to send all over. They didn't understand the differences, and then packed the wrong wine, and then just caused absolute havoc. So I had to get rid of the Vitruvia and just call it New Baby.
Oké, gewoon nog even een toelichting. Dus interessant om weten. Ik heb even gevraagd achter het geheim van het recept met de samenstelling van de verschillende aparte variëteiten die erin zitten. En hij heeft even toegelicht wat iedere variëteit eigenlijk toevoegt aan de wijn. Dat is wel interessant om te weten. Dus we spreken over 45% chenin blanc, die eigenlijk de structuur geeft aan de wijn. We spreken over 26% sauvignon blanc, die soms wat de impressie kan geven van zwarte bessen. We spreken over 15% semillon, wat eigenlijk een stuk aromatisch is en een stuk de textuur geeft aan de wijn. We hebben 8% colombar, die zorgt voor aciditeit. En we hebben 6% chardonnay, die dan het mondgevoel geeft, een beetje het filmend gevoel van de wijn. En ja, die samenstelling bepaalt hij zelf. Dat is een beetje een trial and error, denk ik. Totdat je uiteindelijk komt tot de mooie combinatie die deze New Baby uiteindelijk is. Thanks.
Cool. I'm curious in a couple of years, because New Baby, it's not going to stay a baby, you know? If you have children, baby is just at the beginning. It grows.
Every year is a new vintage, so every year is a new baby, man.
True. Okay, you got me.
I got you, man. I got it covered. I got that question covered.
1-0. Okay, let's go to the first red one. We have Constable House.
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah, so part of the history of the farm is that we, at one stage, we had the Constable of Bonte living on the farm, and I lived in the house and that he lived in, and now my mother lives in that house. And next to the house were his prison cells and his stables for his horses. And so the kind of one component of this wine is Cabernet Sauvignon, and the Cabernet Sauvignon that goes into this wine is planted right in front of the Constable House. So initially, I started off with this wine just being pure Cab, and then it's kind of evolved with time, and I brought in the Syrah and brought more dimension of that in, and yeah, and so it's kind of a wine that fills the role of the unwooded chenin. It's kind of there to be drunk and enjoyed as a red wine. You have the 2017 vintage, or
yes, yes, yeah.
17, yeah. So there's 17 is quite a serious vintage. I couldn't make very easy wines in 17. They're super fascinating. They're quite serious wines, you know. In the 2018 version, it's much lighter and more kind of delicate in structure, whereas 17 has got this kind of lovely kind of complexity and kind of richness and weight to it without being too heavy. So yeah, it's a nice blend. It doesn't go into any new barriques. It's all in older barriques, and then matured in tank for a bit. And it comes mostly from the younger vineyards of Syrah on the farm, or vineyards that don't make it into that are maybe not producing enough intensity from a particular vintage for the dangerfield. And then they go into Constable. So it's already just at the moment it's still very much Syrah Cab driven, but in the future it'll probably evolve into maybe carrying a bit of Malbec and some other cultivars which are interesting as well.
Just want to say that the first three whites, they have the same degree in alcohol. It's 12.5%,
yeah,
which is low.
Yeah. Well, for South Africa, it's very low. Well, yeah, I think it's unusually, you know, most of the time you find wines of 13 or 13.5 white wines. But we had a flight of Burgundy last night, and there were very few wines that were under 13 alcohol. They were all over 13. So it's not just South Africa that has ripeness. So just Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs.
Yeah. And actually, the Constable House has 13.5.
Yeah, the 2018 has 12.5. So yeah, it will vary a little bit from vintage to vintage.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't tell about too much.
Yeah. Any comments about these wines from some people? First three whites and the first red. Can you? Normally we can, if you taste some wines, you can say it's a white winemaker or is a red winemaker. You are the winemaker. You're making them both, I guess, yeah.
Hey, it has my name on it, has my surname on every bottle. It's a business that depends on every bottle being delicious, and if it's not good enough, I don't bottle it and I don't put it out there. So, you know, it's my taste, it's my impression of the wine, and you can never satisfy everybody's taste, but at the end of the day, I believe that what I've put in the bottle is something that's special and delicious and unique, and yeah.
You talked about your small property. How many hectares do you have?
That's a bit of a... We have 30 hectares under vine. So in European terms, it's not small. But in terms of production, I actually produce about just over 110,000 bottles a year, of which the first wine is at least, yeah, it's about half the total production. So just in the first wine, and then all the others, like Hope Marguerite is about 15 to 17,000 bottles. New Baby is around 2,000 bottles, and Constable House can vary from 5 to 12,000 bottles, depending. So yeah, most of the wines are kind of between 2 and 10,000 bottles. That's kind of the idea.
Sebastian,
not big production.
Okay, we had last time we had a tasting with someone from Redheads Australia. We asked them about their wines and food pairing, and they every time they said it's barbecue, it fits with barbecue. I'm not expecting you to say it fits with braai, but if you look at the food pairing of this red wine, this Constable House, what would you say pairs perfectly?
The lekker braai wine, man. Screw cap, you know, you can open it, you can drink it, you can pretend to not drink it all, and you know, but really it's we like to eat outside, and we like to eat like quite casually a lot of the time. I love braaiing, but I don't braai every day. I like interesting food, so I make a lot of food. My wife is a chef, so we love food, and I grew up with a mother whose parents made incredibly boring food, and my mother refused to follow that, so she always made interesting food. So we have I think, yeah, we're not a traditional South African family in that way.
Okay.
We don't braai every day. We braai like once a week or something like that.
Okay. We also have some people from restaurants among us, so, and also for the other people who like to be in the kitchen. For your white wines, what would you say is perfect as a food pairing?
I think for the unwooded chenin, it's pretty diverse. It can handle quite a lot of dishes. It's you know, and a lot of occasions, you know. So sometimes you don't want to have a heavy wine, or you just want to drink something that's refreshing. Maybe it's a warm day. I know that it's always difficult in your part of the world, but you know, you get them every now and then. Whereas with something like Hope Marguerite, I mean, personally, I was in Hamburg once, well, it must be at least 10 years ago, and Syrian chef made me scallops that were fresh, and they were seared in a pan in like a Middle Eastern spice, and it was one of the most incredible taste experiences with Hope Marguerite at the time. It was just like, it's always stuck there in my mind. So something fresh from the sea that is, you know, slightly spicy is really great with a Hope Marguerite. And New Baby can follow that similar kind of trend, but yeah, it's also, you know, it's a complex wine, so it can handle quite a lot of different dishes. So, yeah, but I mean, seafood is generally delicious with that kind of wine.
Ja, die Hope Marguerite met coquille Saint-Jacques, like you said, scallops.
Yeah, coquille Saint-Jacques, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect match. And what you said about your wife as a chef, we all know that every wife is a chef, you know.
But I cook more at home than she does.
Okay.
My wife is a chef, in more ways than one.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
She runs the business, so she's actually my chief strategist, and she runs the finances on top of running her catering and frozen meal business, which she has. So she's a proper force to be reckoned with. So she's an amazing person.
And you're going surfing that time, I guess, yeah?
I tried to, yeah. We've got 3 kids, so you know, it's a juggling act all the time.
Yeah, of course. All right, then we go to the next one, which is going to be the pride, I can say, of South Africa, the pinotage.
The pinotage. There's a great South African saying when it comes to pinotage that I love to use, and it goes like this. It says that pinotage is nie 'n draadsetterswyn. Verstaan julle dit?
No.
Jy verstaan nie, dis 'n draadsitter. Wat 'n draadsitter is nie?
Draadsetter.
'n draadsitter.
No.
Don't let your dirty mind go. So you can't sit on the fence with pinotage.
Okay.
You understand? It's a bit like Pinot Noir. Like last night, honestly, we were drinking Pinot from Clos, and when I first went to Burgundy in 1998, the guy that did the tour, he said, you know, I asked him, like, how do you know what Pinot or Chardonnay to like from Burgundy? He says, well, you just have to taste, and you have to taste and taste and taste and taste and taste as much as you can, and then you'll find the producer whose style you like. And last night, tasting these Clos Vougeots from different producers on different parcels of the Clos, I realized that there are some producers whose style I liked, and some producers whose style I just wasn't my kind of style. And I think that's the same with pinotage. You know, like there are styles of pinotage that you will personally enjoy, and other styles maybe not so much. You know, and you get very rich, very intense, very bold, very oak-driven styles, and then you get kind of nice medium-bodied styles, which I think where mine is sitting, and then you get some new styles which are quite light and focused more on that kind of really almost Beaujolais style of red wine, and that's kind of a contrast, you know, and I think that's where pinotage is. It's got a very strong personality, a very strong character. And it's very unforgiving when it comes to bad winemaking and bad viticulture. And I traveled around the United States with one of the main pinotage producers, a guy who is the winemaker for Kononkorp, Aubrey Bieselaar. And Aubrey and I talked a lot about pinotage while we were traveling. And he said, yeah, you can only blame the winemaker. You can't blame the grape for pinotage that doesn't taste good, you know, and that's so true. You know, like everybody wants to say, oh, you know, you can't plant it here, or you can't do this, or you can do that. Yeah, it's not like that. You have to understand your vineyards, and you have to understand how to make the wine to really capture the best of the grape. And I unapologetically try and make more of a medium-bodied style, and something that's not too heavy. My vineyards are between 47 and 25 years old, so they're not young. They're really nicely established, and they produce a very distinctive style. And we are in a cooler kind of region, so we do get a different fruit spectrum. And that's what I try and reflect in the style. So yeah,
it has a nice elegance, no?
Yeah.
And that is what I like in this pinotage. In general, it's like pinotage is really grape where you are, or you are a fan of pinotage, or you are not. But it's like you said, you can find in many ways different pinotages. So yeah, it's always depending on the producer, of course. But this is like a very elegant and balanced pinotage, which is very good made, very nicely made. Yeah.
Sebastian, if you're saying it's not a draadzetter's wine, does it mean that you have, as a wine grower, you have to really work? Because pinotage on itself, okay, it should work, but you have to do hard work to get a good quality. Is that what it means?
Yeah. Well, you just can't sit on. No, I think it more the term draadzitterswijn, dis nie 'n draadzitterswijn, means when I have people come and visit me, or I present my pinotage, especially South Africans, you'll have South Africans that will come to you and say, I don't drink pinotage. I just don't drink pinotage. And I'll say, okay, well, here's mine. I just try it. Or I won't even tell them it's pinotage. I'll just pour it in their glass and say, try this. And then they'll go, oh wow, this is delicious. What is it? And I say it's pinotage. And then they say, oh well, geez, that's changing my perception of what pinotage is about. And then so the term really refers to consumers who, I think, in the same way that Pinot Noir is, you get people who love Bordeaux and you get people who love Burgundy, and the two are very different. And you can't really you know, they're always going to be different kind of people, you know, and you're going to choose the style of wine that you like, you know, and that's what pinotage does to you, you know. Like, either it appeals to your taste buds and you enjoy that style of wine, or you say, no, I prefer drinking syrah, you know, or something else. But you never in the middle ground. You never undecided. It's very clear always with pinotage. Yeah.
Where was pinotage invented? Because it's Senso and Pinot Noir. Where did they make the crossing? Was it in South Africa?
Yeah, in South Africa in the 1920s. A professor of viticulture, Professor Perold, he came up with a crossing, and that's where that was kind of the 1920s, and then nothing much happened with it until the late 1950s, when things were really, where pinotage was kind of planted commercially and people started making serious pinotages in kind of more, in bigger volumes. So that was when I think it got more traction and more interest, and the name was really set. And that the name comes from Pinot and Tage, which is the other name for Senso, which is Hermitage. So that's where the combination of the name came from. So, yeah.
Do you see it as a positive point, like we have Malbec, we connect it with Argentina, for example, like we Carmenera, we do with Chile. Pinotage, we always do it with South Africa. Do you see that as a marketing point of view, as a consumer kind of stuff? Do you think it's a good stuff, or you don't like it?
No, I love pinotage. But I love my style of pinotage, and I don't love all pinotages, but I have an appreciation of them. And I think that it's very dangerous to peg your country to one grape when there's such, especially in a country like South Africa, where the regions and the sub-regions are so diverse in terms of microclimates and kind of how you grow grapes. In Argentina, it's much easier. You know, the general climate around Mendoza, for example, which is kind of the main producing region. And I'm not trying to make Argentina simple in that way. There's a lot more complexity to Argentina. And I think they're starting to show that there's more than just Malbec in Argentina at the moment. But so if you want an introduction, then yes, pinotages can be a very good way to introduce people if you've got the right pinotage. It can also, if you got the wrong style or a badly made one, it'll put people off South Africa forever. You know, my mother-in-law is a living proof of that. She, when we started making wine and making pinotages in the 90s, we didn't fully understand the kind of complexity of the grape, and we made a couple of wines that weren't great. You know, and my father used to say, you know, we were so desperate to sell the bottles. He would just say no to people. Just the more you drink, the more that flavor goes away, and you'll be fine. You just drink the whole bottle. Just make sure you drink it all. But that's, you know, he tried to tell my mother-in-law that, and she hated the wine, and she just couldn't get past it. And now she drinks pinotage again, but it took her 20 years to get it there. You know, so I know this kind of way that it works.
If you need to define yourself as a wine lover, and then a wine lover, you need to choose a wine region or a wine style, which is not South Africa, of course. But if you go, for example, you just said a Burgundy or Bordeaux drinkers, which are really different. How do you describe yourself as a wine drinker, as a wine lover, as a wine geek? You want more Burgundy or more Bordeaux? Or more Côte d'Ivoire, maybe? You can choose.
Can I choose Riesling?
Riesling, yes, you can. Cool.
I love Riesling. I find Riesling fantastic. I saw somebody's comment about Riesling only being in cool regions. That is generally true. I think the flavor profile kind of only develops where you've got time on the vine, you know, where you've got that length of time for the grape to ripen and develop those amazing flavors. So I do have a very soft spot for Riesling. But you know, I'm fascinated by wine. So wine fascinates me. Regionality and identity and personality behind wine fascinates me. So I don't think there's anything like a region that I love Bordeaux. I love great Bordeaux, but I don't like overripe Bordeaux. I like classic Bordeaux. I like Burgundy when it's very precise, you know, Pinot, you know. Some Pinots get too wild and too woolly, you know, and then I'm not so fascinated by them. But yeah, I'm still learning about wine. And unfortunately, the worst thing about South Africa is that we don't get a lot of great foreign wine here. So we're always quite like limited by, you know, there's some good importers now, and when we get to travel again, I'm always bringing wine back, and but so I can't, yeah, I won't pigeonhole myself or
yeah. Do you have Riesling?
No.
On your property?
No.
No. And where because there was a question at the beginning. Riesling at South Africa needs more altitude since it's more a cool climate grade.
Yeah. So in Elgin, there's obviously Paul Kluwer making probably the best Riesling in South Africa. There's also Spionkop. I think he's a Belgian. He's a bit of a crazy dude. I mean, you're all crazy, right?
Yeah.
He's your example, right? But he's making.
Paul Kluwer was good to mention because I also work with Paul Kluwer, so he really makes good Riesling. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we'll stick to Kluwer. I think they make some delicious ones. I was actually at Hartenberg yesterday, and Hartenberg have been making Riesling for quite a long time in Stellenbosch. And we had two wines from Carl, the winemaker there, and they were both really delicious, kind of older vintages and really good. So yeah, sometimes you just need time for the wine.
All right, let's go to the last one, which has a danger name, Dangerfield Shiraz, Syrah actually. Yeah, not Shiraz.
Not Shiraz. So yeah, there's been a kind of a trend to the style of relatively new trend towards the style of Shiraz. And if you just to give you context of what has happened in South Africa around the grape, it's quite important to remember that before 1994, South Africa was very isolated from any global kind of exposure in terms of wine. You could get some wines and imported wines that were of great quality, but it was really difficult to get a wide spectrum. You were very limited. And so I think the winemakers' palates had been kind of stunted in a way that they weren't very exposed to the kind of global wine world out there. And I think that a lot has changed in kind of how would you put it? It's just the wine world has evolved quite a lot in the last 25 to 30 years, you know, and not just in South Africa, but in all parts. And I think it was led by the kind of new world movement of going after this kind of riper single cultivar trend of wine making with this kind of very opulent fruit and kind of richness that you get in the wines, which was I think highlighted by the kind of Australian style of Shiraz that they were producing, you know, and really kind of I think took the world by storm by producing these very dense, rich styles of Shiraz, you know, and they're a bit like Australians, you know, they didn't have much subtlety to them, you know, they weren't very, you know, they're quite in your face. So hope there are no Australians in the audience tonight, but so I think South Africa was at that phase where we were very impressionable, where the journalists were writing quite tough articles about South African red wines, especially the being quite like green and a little bit like old worldy and not new world enough, and you know, and what kind of styles were we making. So we kind of copied this Australian, Californian style of ripeness and richness with young vineyards, and I think made wines that kind of lost their regionality, their South Africanness, you know, their identity in a way. And it's taken maybe in the last, say, 10 to 15 years to really try and find that again, you know. And I think across the board, the wines that you see from South Africa at the moment carry, whether it be Shiraz or, you know, any cultivar, have much more South African identity than they did 15 years ago. There's I think a much better understanding of viticulture. There's a much better understanding of winemaking. There's a much more kind of confidence in terms of producing wines that speak of where they come from. And I think that's a really exciting part about South African wine at the moment. People are making wines from unusual cultivars, which is, you know, it's interesting, but it's still got to be good wine to be really, really great. You know, you can't just make it because it's a different cultivar or something like that. So anyway, this whole trend around Shiraz was kind of, for me personally, quite a difficult one. It was, you know, when you go into the vineyards and you eat the grapes, the Shiraz grapes, they're the most delicious. You know, they're the nicest grape to eat in the vineyard. It's soft-skinned. It's got lovely berry fruit flavors. It's always got this kind of, you just want to eat the whole bunch, you know, you got no hesitation. Other grapes are a bit more difficult, you know, they've got thicker skins, they've got bigger seeds, they're more herbal, more leafy kind of characters, but Shiraz is super delicious. And yet the wines that I was making were quite like heavy and maybe a little bit one-dimensional in the kind of expression of flavor. Because I was picking them a bit too ripe, and maybe because the oak was a little bit too dominant. Even though I'm not a big fan of new oak, I was maybe using 35% instead of 20%. You know what I mean? And so I was kind of looking at it and trying to figure out ways of improving my style of Shiraz. And then blended in a whole lot of Mourvèdre, like 30% Mourvèdre into it, to see whether that would change the style and I would come up with something more interesting. And that kind of worked, but I found that the people that were kind of trying to introduce to the wine found it really difficult to understand what a Shiraz Mourvèdre blend was about. And so then I kind of like was trying other styles that some of the other producers were making. And in 2013, I made the first version of this wine, Dangerfield Syrah. And this was kind of really going to picking it a bit earlier, trying to get to 13 or at the most 13.5 alcohol, doing some whole bunch ferments, keeping them on the skins for longer, keeping them on the stalks for longer, trying to get a bit more perfume and a bigger spectrum of flavor and aromatics out of the wine without it being heavy, you know, without being this kind of wine that makes you tired. I think I was also I just had my by then I had second child. So I was, you know, you're kind of exhausted when you got kids and trying to make wine and run a business and the whole thing. So, yeah.
So Sebastian, before I do a little translation, it's really a search for elegance, I think, for the whites and for the reds. Yeah. Especially for the reds, to look for some elegance, to look what you do in the vinification, to look what you do when you pick them, at what moment you pick the grapes, in search for not too much alcohol, the way, in fact, in the earlier days, South African wines were described as heavy, powerful and boring, in fact.
Boring.
Ja. Dus wat Sebastian zegt is eigenlijk zowel in wit als in rood is eigenlijk een zoektocht naar elegantie. Als we zien dat de eerste 3 witte wijnen, dus de 3 witte wijnen dat we gehad hebben, alle 3 12,5% hebben qua alcohol, dat is niet te veel. Dus we hebben daar inderdaad de terechte opmerking gekregen dat een van de wijnen ook zo'n beetje de impressie had van een klein beetje restsuiker. Dus echt niet volledig alles laten vergisten. Maar dat is dus die constante zoektocht waarover dat Sebastian spreekt. De zoektocht voornamelijk ook in de rood. Om een beetje het tegenwicht te vormen van wat men vroeger voornamelijk over Zuid-Afrikaanse wijnen zei. Namelijk dat nogal, vooral in de rood, ook zeer krachtige, soms wel vermoeiende wijnen waren met hoog alcoholgehalte en echt wel vermoeiend. 1 glas en dan had je genoeg. Dan had je geen zin om nog een tweede glas te gaan drinken. Terwijl we hier nu merken, en dat is ook de zoektocht dat hij ook nog continu voert en waarin dat hij volgens mij eigenlijk al zeer goed geslaagd is, dat hem ook in die rode, ook in de witte, kijkt naar vinificatie. Hoe ga ik het, wanneer ga ik gaan plukken? Wanneer ga ik mijn druiven gaan plukken? Op wat gepast moment? Het moment waarop dat ze niet te rijp zijn, maar toch voldoende fenolische rijpheid hebben om geen bitters te krijgen in de smaak van de wijn. En dan ook in de vinificatie gaan kijken van wat pas ik hier nu best toe om optimale smaak te krijgen zonder zware wijn te gaan krijgen. Dus voldoende contact met de druivenschil bijvoorbeeld. Dus verschillende methodes gaan gebruiken om toch te krijgen. Hetgeen dat we hier vanavond in het glas krijgen bij de 3 rode wijnen, vind ik sowieso. Zeer veel smaak, zeker niet te krachtig of te zwaar. Voor mij heb je bij alle wijnen dat we tot nu toe, en dat we eigenlijk, we zijn aan het einde bijna, gedronken hebben, zit je met die elegantie en nog altijd die zin om het volgende glas te gaan drinken. En niet na 1 glas te zeggen van oké, het was lekker, maar ik heb eigenlijk genoeg. Dus dat is een beetje het principe en dat is de zoektocht die Sebastian doet en waarin dat hij mij waarschijnlijk nu een stuk begrijpt in mijn Vlaamse uitleg die ik geef. Okay, thank you, Sebastian.
Yeah, but he has, like you said, a kind of an elegance which makes it easy to drink. True, of course, but without losing the typicity of the grape, without going to anything which is a general thing. No, it's really every time a different wine, but the female touch, let's call it like that, or the elegance he put in it is really nice made. If you need to say or define what is Beaumont wines is standing for, what do you want the people that are here tonight, they need to remember at the end who is Sebastian, but what is your wines? What is your signature?
Philosophy, yeah.
You have 10 seconds.
It's a difficult one, eh? It's difficult to simplify wine to such a point, but my principle is, I think, if I'd been a winemaker in a different country or a different part of the world, I would have had maybe a slightly different saying. But for here in South Africa, where we have the climate that can ripen things, I prefer to find, I would say, define it by saying that elegance is over power is more. So I prefer elegance to power. In wine, I prefer it in life in general. For me, I like to find the subtlety, the complexity, the things that come out, and when you spend enough time with a wine, and I think, you know, one can't rush it, and I think that there's always wine always carries a story. So there's this kind of thing where it must speak of its place. Otherwise it's just wine, you know. And there's enough wine out there in the world that doesn't have an identity, you know, that doesn't have a kind of a defining style or character. And you know, for me, I love to find wines that speak of where they come from. So that's for me really important.
Je kan altijd, moet ik erop letten, hè, als je zo verschillende wijnmakers ziet, en I'm going to translate in a minute, but als je zo van die wijnmakers ontmoet zoals op een avond zoals dit, dan kun je heel dikwijls het karakter of de stijl van de persoon zo herkennen in de wijn. En ik vind dat die vanavond in het gamma wijnen die we nu geproefd hebben eigenlijk heel duidelijk is. We zijn je zit dat met een knuffel, hè, bij wijze van spreken. Dus we zijn een toffe, zachtaardige, man die eigenlijk wel eens een beetje rebel is, maar aan de andere kant ook heel zachtaardig is, maar toch wel met de voet op de grond staat. En dat is zo precies in die wijnen. Ze hebben enerzijds karakter genoeg, maar anderzijds zijn ze heel elegant. En ja, elegant is eigenlijk het woord. Down to earth. Dat is eigenlijk zo'n beetje... You recognize the wine producer in the wine, which that was I'm telling. Yeah, but
I see there's a beer producer trying to ask me what I think about beer.
Yeah.
I knew that was coming at some stage. I'm surprised that it took so long though. Yeah, I'm not wild about beer, huh? But I have one beer that I sell in my winery for the beer drinkers. So when you come and visit, there will be one beer. It's not made by me, but it's a local beer from Amanus. It's a lager, and I love it for its directness and refreshing, like drink when I've had a long day of tasting wine or something like that. There's nothing better than having a beer. So yeah.
That's what we do if we're doing a wine fair. At the end, we're all drinking a beer because...
Exactly, you need it like that. It's something different.
It's good for the palate, let's say. Sebastian, I very, very love the one sentence that you said about your wines when Dimitri asked you the question. In fact, you said that elegance is overpowering.
Yeah. No,
so
elegance overpower.
It's overpowered, but it's overpowering power. So it's all elegant. It's all about elegance. So I like the phrase. Yeah, I like it very much.
Good.
Okay. So I don't know if somebody has some questions. Of course, you can ask them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and say something. But my opinion, like we already discussed or said, I like the wines. Very well done, Sebastian. Thank you for being here among us. Yeah. I don't know. Did I forget something to mention, Hans? I don't know.
Well, I see some comments in the chat, so I think it's saying everything. It's people are saying very elegant, syrah. I love it. About the pinotage. Yes, someone said, yeah, you love it or you hate it, but I love it. So that's a good one. Rich taste, variation in tastes, complexity, well done. A good job. So very nice comments indeed. So very pleasant discovery with some great wines, with a preference for the Chenin Blanc and the Hope Marguerite. So yeah, I think everyone enjoyed. And someone is saying also, when it's allowed later this year, I will drop by at Beaumont Winery. So we'll get some visitors also. Let's hope we can visit you in the near future. Yeah. So yeah, I think everything is said. So I would like to thank Sebastian for the explanation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Dus ik hoop dat iedereen ervan genoten heeft terug van deze avond. Weet dat we dus op regelmatige basis, in het begin was dat wat meer, nu is dat om de 14 dagen ongeveer dat wij een proeverij doen. Wij sluiten altijd de proeverij af met te zeggen van kijk, iedereen die meegedaan heeft aan de proeverij en die een beetje in Zuid-Afrika was vanavond, die kan als hij een goesting heeft de wijn bestellen, doet dat niet online, doet dat via mail naar mij of naar Dimitri. Dan krijg je sowieso 10% korting op het volledige gamma van Beaumont Wines. En dat doen wij als geste. Dus dat kun je gerust via mail doorgeven en dan brengen wij je wel op de hoogte hoe dat we de levering doen, of dat via courier is of dat we dat eventueel, als dat dichterbij is, zelf kunnen doen. We weten dat we binnen 14 dagen een volgende proeverij hebben die uitermate boeiend is, want we zijn excited. We hebben een paar weken geleden de 4e container Russische wijnen binnengekregen met een aantal nieuwe referenties dat we een tijd geleden geproefd hadden, dat we nu opnieuw teruggeproefd hadden, waardoor dat we nog meer excited zijn. Dus ja, dat zal een proeverij zijn met een 6-tal Russische wijnen. Dat wordt ook zeker leuk met dan ook de Russische wijnmaker online, Michael. Dus dat is iets om in het achterhoofd te houden. Dat is binnen 14 dagen, de 29e april. Kan je ook online hetzelfde principe bestellen via de website. Ja, voilà. En dan denk ik voor mij een deel dat alles gezegd is. En dan laat ik sowieso Dimitri het laatste woord geven. Hè.
Dus ja, merci Hans.